All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Normally, I'm in my studio or in my office or in my home, but today I'm in the great outdoors. I'm in downtown Vancouver. So I'm in BC. How fitting that you've joined Innovate BC. And usually I'm joining from Amiskwaci, Waskagan, Treaty 6 territory, but today, this week, it's landed me in BC, and I feel very honored. The land out here is beautiful. So welcome to Innovate BC with Can Do. We're honored that you've decided to join us for this Wednesday afternoon. Hope you're all doing well. We'd love to hear where you're joining us from. So feel free to put your name or your name already is in the chat box, but where you're joining from in that chat box. We always love to hear where our family's joining us from. So happy Wednesday. Before we get started, I always feel it's important just to take a moment to acknowledge and to honor Creator. You know, as I'm in this new territory, this new land this afternoon, just in awe of the beauty, the magnificence of creation, of the waters. You know, there's not much water around Edmonton, but the ocean is just over there. So just taking a moment to acknowledge and honor all the goodness, all the beauty that is around you. Even if there is no ocean, there's beauty that's all around you. So we give thanks to Creator for the gifts that have been given to us to help us to walk in a good way. We thank Creator for the elders, those who've walked before us. We're thankful for the knowledge keepers and those who are presenting today. So I am delighted to introduce Angela. You're joining us from BC, right, Angela? So I'm going to give her a little shout out in a moment, but we just give thanks to Creator for all of the gifts. So hi. All right, so today you've joined the Indigenous governance and nation building. So you're going to learn about the ABCs of good governance, 5 principles of good governance, 5 core principles of Native nation rebuilding, how governance affects nation building, Indigenous governance applications to successful nation building, and what success looks like. So all good things. You're in for a treat this afternoon. So our speaker, she's a proud member of the Tahltan Nation and resides in the unceded territory of the Splatsin people in the North Okanagan. She's held several executive level positions in both for-profits and non-for-profit Indigenous organizations. She also sat on her nation's governance board of directors who oversee all the economic development within the Tahltan territory in northern BC. So growing up in both worlds, she understands the needs to integrate both societies and the various components of a community. So the community is built holistically, strategically, I think I butchered that word, strategically, there we go, and with the local Indigenous ways of being and doing at the center, and that is so important. So Angela, she's an instructor with several Indigenous and non-Indigenous training educational organizations, and she develops culturally aware curriculum in Indigenous entrepreneurship and community and business development. Wow, all I can say is wow. We are delighted that you've carved a piece of your time to share your knowledge, your good knowledge. So thank you so much, Angela, and thank you everyone for joining. So feel free to use that chat box, put some comments in there, questions. We will tend to it. There's about 10 minutes after today's presentation for any comments, questions, or you know, maybe your own story. Sometimes these webinars remind us of our own stories. So we'd love to hear from you. So welcome, and I'm going to pass this virtual mic over to Angela. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Michelle. I love your energy. Every time I get to see you, I love your energy. Thank you so much. And it's very, very much a privilege and an honor to be here with you. I love to share experiences that I've had within Indigenous communities and what has worked and what hasn't worked. And so I just want to say thank you very much. I honor you for taking your time to be here with me and to learn, hopefully take away some truths and some nuggets from this presentation. I'm actually no longer in Splatsin territory. I am now in Lower Nicola Indian Band territory. Beautiful, beautiful area here. Very much enjoying my time here. And then next week we will be in Kelowna. So my husband and I do a lot of traveling. And so we get to really appreciate creators' creation in many different places, primarily in BC. But again, thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen with you. And I apologize, I will not see the chat box. I'm very focused on the presentation. So if you have questions, feel free, you can put them in the chat box, and I'm sure someone will moderate that, and we can take care of that later if that works for you. So let me just share my screen. Here we are. Okay, can everybody see this? Yes. Fantabulous. Thank you so much. Okay, so today we are going to be talking again about Indigenous governance and nation building. I got to move this over. How do I move you all over? Okay, there you are. Okay. Okay, so we're going to be talking about everything that Michelle mentioned to you and how they overlap. Like, why do you need good governance for nation building or rebuilding? Creating wise governance to build strong nations. Oh, it's going down one at a time. Sorry, I'll skip right to 3. Okay, so here we've already talked about what we're going to cover, so I won't go over that again. I want to leave lots of time for questions at the end. Okay, so the first slide here. Sorry, I really got to move you guys over just because it's interfering with my little computer here. I only have my little laptop today, so okay. So good governance. This is probably my favorite quote on governance because it is so true. So good governance never depends upon laws. It depends upon the personal qualities of those who govern. The machinery of government is always subordinate to the will of those who administer that machinery. So the most important element of government, therefore, is our method of how we choose our leaders. So how you choose your leaders is as important as who you choose to lead. So what are the qualities of good leadership? I love acronyms. It helps me to remember. When I was in university, it was the way for me to get through all of my courses if I had to memorize stuff. I used it for my PMP as well. It helps me to learn. So the qualities of good leadership, I want to run through these. Loyal. So good leaders are loyal to the people, not to themselves. The people precede, the importance of the people it's the most important thing, not themselves. Empathetic, encouraging, empowering, and enabling. Whoever you choose to lead has to be able to be empathetic, not just sympathetic. People have to not only know the challenges that their people face, but they have to be empathetic to those challenges. And then they have to be encouraging to their people and give them the encouragement that we can overcome these challenges together. They have to be empowering, not discouraging, not removing courage from the people, but empowering their people to overcome any of our challenges, which then enables us to work together to overcome our challenges. Attitude, aptitude, and authentic, which is very similar to being honest. So good leaders have a good attitude. Even in the face, it's very difficult to be a leader. Everybody knows that. It's very hard to be a leader. We get picked on the most, so being able to maintain a good attitude is probably, I would say, the number one key for leadership, is being able to look above the situation and as if you're looking down into what's going on and you're not right in the middle of it. And then aptitude. There has to be some aptitude for leadership. Leadership should not be a popularity contest. the most popular person in the community should not get the position of leadership if they do not have these qualities. If they do not have the aptitude to lead, then they should not be in the position. And I know that that isn't always, I've worked in many, many First Nation communities. I know that's not always the case. It's something that we need to strive towards. We need to strive to make sure that the people that we are putting in our leadership actually have an aptitude for leadership. And then again, authentic, honesty. I mean, you can't do any type of leadership without honesty. Transparency is another way of saying that. And then a desire to serve. Servant leadership is that's how I lead. That's how I choose to lead. If I'm in leadership position, it's because I've been put there to serve. So leaders have to have that desire to serve. And, it isn't something that everybody has, and that's all right, but it is something that can be developed. And what I have found is that the more intimately acquainted you are with your people and you really understand their struggles, the more you have a desire to serve. So that desire to serve does also come from relationship, right? If we have a deep relationship with somebody and, something happens to them, or a situation comes up, or they need help, we're far more likely to want to help them than if we don't know them. So leaders need to engage with their communities. They have to know who their people are. And then excellence. We have to serve with excellence. We have to look for leaders that don't want to do a half job, that they understand that they are there because they need to set the example of what excellence looks like in their work. We're not all good at everything. And, I've led organizations that have had 7 lines of businesses, and I'm not an architect. I'm not a forest person. I'm not a construction person, but my team, they know how to do their jobs and they know how to do them well. And my job as the leader is to help them to do it with excellence. I had to provide the tools for them so that they could do their job with excellence. So we don't have to be excellent at everything, but we have to be, as leaders, we have to be an example of excellence, and we have to help our team become excellent at whatever work that they do. And then responsible. And we're going to talk about this a little bit later as well. Of course, these will intertwine with the whole conversation today, but responsibility is a huge thing. It's like they say, the buck stops here. Like, I'm the CEO, something goes wrong and it wasn't my fault. It's still on me. It still lands on me. So leaders have to be ready to take that responsibility regardless. They have to be able to take the hits for the team. And then strong, sensitive to the needs of others. Leadership is not for the faint of heart. Leaders have to be strong and courageous, but at the same time, they have to be sensitive to the needs of others. Leaders have to be hopeful for a good future. If we have a leader in place that doesn't see hope for the future of our communities, or is there only for, they're there for a good time, not a long time, that does not lend to really good stability, for one thing. And it doesn't, leaders have to paint the vision of what the future looks like. That's what we're called to do. So they have to be hopeful. They have to have a healthy mind, soul, and spirit. And you notice I didn't put body in there because sometimes, people have different health issues and stuff that we all deal with, but they do, at the very minimum, have to have a healthy mind. They have to have a healthy soul, which is your mind, will, and your emotions. And they have to have a healthy spirit. Okay, I'm just going. And then initiative. Leaders have to take the initiative. You're not leading. There's a really good quote that says, if you're leading and nobody's following, you're just taking a walk. Well, leaders need to take the initiative. They need to lead. They need to be inspiring, again, painting that picture of the better future. And they have to want to leave a lasting impact. Leaders want to leave things better than how they found them, period. It doesn't even matter if it's a little bit, because we know that sometimes we really, we have some pretty challenging situations sometimes in our communities. And I've worked, in, reserve communities. I've worked in inner city communities. When I worked for the city of Edmonton, I worked with the 9 most inner city communities in Edmonton. And so we had a lot of really challenging issues there. So it doesn't matter where, where the people that we're leading are. We have to be willing to make an impact. That needs to be our bottom line goal. And last, we have to be positive. Again, we have to rise above. We cannot let the negativity pull us down. So this looks like a really big bill to fill. But this brings me to my point that I'd really like to stress, that as leaders, our job is to build more leaders. That's our job too. Our job is actually to create more leaders. So I would challenge anybody who's in community, if you work with First Nations in any capacity, start a leadership program. Have some sort of program for your youth, even for your leaders, to teach them what good leadership really looks like. Because, the truth is, we only know what we know. We can't expect things that you only know what you know. And I'll use an example of that. When I was a foster parent for many years, raised 16 kids. Some of my kids were in my home for long term, like my sibling set of 5 that I'm mom to them. But some of them weren't. Some of my kids left after, they went home or whatever the situation was. But I heard from them like through social media years later. And the thing that they said to me was, you know what? The thing that you showed me was what could be. Even though they had not necessarily lived in a healthy family prior, but when they came to our home, even though I didn't have them for a long time, we were able to give them an example of what a home could look like. So that when they grew up and they had a home, they had something that they could then look back on. So we need to provide that vision of what good leadership looks like to our youth, to our kids. I would say start in the schools, start in the elementary school, start teaching these things ASAP. So now we'll get into some good governance. These are the ABCs of good governance. So authority. Again, this goes back to leadership. Who holds the power? Who holds the power in your nation? Is it all with one person? Maybe that's not very wise. Is it just with chief and council? Is it just with the CEO of the ECDEV Corp and their board? Who holds the power? I have had personal experience with, the chief kind of has the final vote, and every community does this different. And so it wasn't really very democratic. It kind of basically it caused some really huge issues within the community. So we have to look at who holds the power with our governance, and then action. Who makes the decisions? So someone holds the authority, but who actually helps to make the decisions? Is the community involved? Is it maybe you have an elders council, maybe you have a youth council, but who makes the decisions? And then accountability. How are they held accountable? This is hugely, hugely important. How are you going to hold those who are in authority or those who make the decisions accountable for those decisions? And then who is affected and how can they participate? So for example, in this situation that we're talking about today, the community is affected by the decisions. So how can they participate in these decisions? These are really important questions. Let's look at the B's. Board. Do your board members fulfill your organization's needs? Now, what do I mean by that? So let's say you're a new organization. Well, every new organization typically has some sort of budget. So you want to have someone on your board that knows something about money. You want to have someone on your board that either is an accountant or at the very minimum, a bookkeeper, someone who understands financial statements, somebody, because your board is supposed to be the support, right? Or your council, whatever council, if you can interrelate these. Let's say you are a community and your community plan is to have tourism. Okay, that's on your strategic plan. So on your board, you probably want to have somebody that has really good experience in the tourism industry, specifically, if possible, the Indigenous tourism industry. So you really want to make sure that your board members are serving your organization by providing expertise in those areas that are important to your nation. Okay, it's not, again, it shouldn't be a popularity contest. This should be strategic. You sit down and you say, okay, who do we need on our board? And then you make a plan to find those people rather than just, it's just open to the first 5 people. It's got to be strategic. And then business ethics. Sorry, I'm just going to take a drink. Business ethics. Does your organization have a business ethics policy? Hugely important. Often we don't think about this. But I'll tell you, when you start getting into the thick of things and things start happening that could possibly be considered unethical, well, if you don't have a policy, it makes it pretty hard to do anything about it. And then if you do have which I would recommend you do this ASAP, is create your business ethics policy. Number 3, is it enforced? If you do have one. Or how are you going to enforce it? I would recommend that you have somebody that has either taken a course in business ethics, that maybe you have included them on your board. Maybe they sit on a committee. But this is becoming more and more of an issue, that business ethics, especially as more and more non-Indigenous organizations want to engage with Indigenous communities to do work, to do JV, joint venture agreements. In Tahltan territory, we're all mining, of course. The majority of our work is all mining. So it's very, very important. Do your board members and top leadership display excellent business ethics? And then back to that similar question, how do you manage, or how do you plan to manage unethical behavior? C, you need culturally aware leadership. Does the leadership align itself with the culture of the community and the organization? Again, I can't say how many times I have seen ECDEV Corps, particularly because that's where I've sat. They'll bring in people to sit on the board that actually know nothing about the community. Or even the organization. As a leader, it's my job to help to create the culture of the organization. But when I'm a new leader, the culture is already there. And either I get to, make it better, stronger, or I have to completely change it. But whoever the leadership is, they need to have some cultural awareness of both the community and the organization and know what they're stepping into. It's really important during the interview process with whomever you're going to bring on your board or in any form of leadership, that they understand what the culture is. Are they stepping into a culture that's very dysfunctional? Are they stepping into a culture that is very strong and has some great policies in place? These are really important things to communicate. And then some more core policies. So we talked about the business ethics, but you need to have a conflict of interest, especially as you start doing work within your community with outside organizations, or conflict of interest for whomever you're going to have on the board. Are they double dipping? Are they, you need to have that very clear. And then how do you take care of your documents and your records? So I actually attended an Indigenous data sovereignty conference in the States a couple of years ago via video. And it was extremely interesting. And as you know, Indigenous groups all over the world, specifically in Australia and New Zealand, they tend to have a head start on us by about 5 years, are taking the Indigenous data sovereignty very, very seriously now. And we need to do that as well at our community level. So how do we take care of our documents and our records? Who's not allowed to see them? Who is allowed to see them? How are they protected? This is really, really important information. And then how do you take care of your people? That should be a policy. Think about that. So there are 5 principles of good governance. And this is from the Governance and Nation building in Banff Center, which I attended their course, and also the Institute on Governance. So this is where they got their information from. So the Indigenous Institute on Governance, governance principles. Number 1, legitimacy and voice. So you can read this, but I'm just going to go through this. All men and women should have a voice in decision making. We talked about that a little kind of briefly, either directly or through legitimate intermediate institutions that represent their intention. Broad participation is built on freedom of association and speech, as well as capacities to participate constructively. I love the wording of this. So any participation needs to be constructive. So when we hold our AGAs, AGMs, whatever you call your, sometimes it's done monthly or quarterly. If we read these out and what good governance looks like, and that we have a tolerance for constructive participation, that will make for a good meeting. Good governance mediates differing interests to reach a broad consensus on what is the best interest of the group, and where possible, on policies and procedures. Direction. Strategic vision. We talked about this. Leaders have to set the vision. Leaders in the public have a broad and long-term perspective on good governance and human development, along with a sense of what is needed for such development. We just talked about that. Leadership development. There's also an understanding of the historical, cultural, and social complexities in which that perspective is grounded. Performance. Responsiveness. Institutions and processes try to serve all stakeholders. Again, this goes back to leadership. Effectiveness and efficiency. Processes and institutions produce results that meet needs while making the best use of resources. I would highly recommend that you do an community asset resource exercise if you get a chance, and I can provide some links if anyone's interested. There's some really, really great links on actually programs that you can follow right through. Accountability. Again, we talked about this. Decision makers in government, the private sector, and civil society organizations are accountable to the public or to their community or to their board, as well as to the institutional stakeholders. This accountability differs depending on the organization and whether the decision is internal or external. So again, this is where that, honesty and the accountability comes in. Not all internal decisions are supposed to be shared externally. We need to have that, that code of conduct in there. Transparency is built on the free flow of information. The community should be able to access information when there are decisions made about them at any time. It should not be withheld from our communities. Processes, institutions, and information are directly accessible to those concerned with them and enough information is provided to understand and monitor them. So if our communities don't understand the decisions we've made, then we've really not served them. They need to understand what decisions we made and why. And then fairness. All men and women have opportunities to improve or maintain their well-being, and legal frameworks should be fair and enforced impartially, particularly on the laws of human rights. So these 5 core principles, we're going to go into a nation rebuilding now. And this comes from, you can see from the Arizona University, what native building looks like. And this is actually was a fabulous project that they did. So the Native Nations Institute Understanding on Indigenous Nation Building came from 30 years of research. I'm going to move my little thing here. By the Harvard Project on American Indian Economic Development, which was founded in '86. Their research efforts have sought to understand the conditions in which sustained development can be successful in Indigenous nations. And these 5 elements came out as the most important. Number 1. So now we're talking about nation rebuilding, because we're assuming now we have good governance in place. So sovereignty, our nations make the major decisions. Native nations that have been willing and able to assert self-governing power have significantly increased their chances of sustainable economic development. This is assuming, again, that we have good leaders in place with good governance. I have seen situations where there have been great governance policies in place, not so great leaders have been elected, and everything falls apart. So this is assuming we have good governance. And then the nation backs up authority with competence. Again, we have to have capable people in place. People have the aptitude. The chances of sustainable development rise as Indigenous nations put in place effective, non-politicized dispute resolution mechanisms and build capable bureaucracies. So we have to have capable governing institutions. Governing institutions match community beliefs about how the authority should be organized. So there's a cultural match again. Institutions that build and innovate upon Indigenous conceptions of governing responsibilities fare better than those whose form departs from such conceptions. Strategic orientation. Decisions are made with long-term priorities in mind. And we know that as First Nations people, that we need to think 7 generations or beyond. Did you know that the Chinese think in 1,000 years? That's how they make their plans. They make their plans based on 1,000 years. It's crazy. Decisions are made with, successful nations tend to approach development not as a quick fix for poverty, but as a means of building a society that works. I heard this really good quote from Jane Jacobs. If you've ever read any of her books, I haven't, I highly recommend it. And she said, the opposite of poverty is prosperity. It's not a quick fix. The opposite of poverty is to create prosperity. And then public spirited leadership. Individuals who recognize the need for fundamental change and can engage with the community to make that happen. So in successful Indian nations, there is typically a group of individuals who recognize the need for fundamental change in the way things are done and can bring the community along with them. That's leadership. They lead the way and they invite the community to join them. I know this is a lot of information. I believe they'll share the PowerPoint with you if you want. So how does governance affect nation building? Well, according to Chauvet and Collier in 2004, this is one of their papers, communities with poor quality of governance will lead to less economic growth. And we know that. We've seen that. Some of us may have experienced it. So again, everything rests on the leaders that we choose. The main governance factors that affect economic development include voice and accountability, political stability. That's why I think that several communities have moved from a 2-year to a 4-year term which makes far more sense because we know that every election we lose a year. We lose 6 months before and we lose 6 months after. It's just not a lot gets done in that year. So let's, create a little more political stability. Sometimes that can be done by staggering. Everybody is just not a clear the table and refill it. Sometimes it's a good idea to stagger it. You keep, let's say you have 8 council, you're keeping 6 and 2 are changing every 2 years or whatever, but you need to have some political stability. Government effectiveness, regulatory quality, rule of law, and control of corruption. Those are the main things that affect economic development. And this doesn't obviously just apply to Indigenous communities. This applies around the world. If you look at countries in the world that are struggling economically, you can be sure that they have most of these, if not all of them, that are causing them not to proceed and not to grow economically. The strongest impact on economic development are these three: voice and accountability, government effectiveness, and control of corruption. Those are the most three. If you're going to take these and you're going to start concentrating on a couple at a time in your communities, these are the strongest impact. So voice and accountability, again, this is just basically who can speak. You get to select your government as you choose. You get the freedom of expression association, political stability, and the absence of violence. We just talked about that. Our community leaders can take responsibility for the level of violence in their community. I had one of my staff told me, he actually came from Ontario, and he said his community found out that there was Hell's Angels and some drugs and things going on in his community. So a whole bunch of them got together and they went to the house and they burned it down. I don't recommend that. I'm just saying they took responsibility for what was going on in their community, and they have not had a problem since. So that's leadership. Again, I do not advocate burning down houses, but I do advocate taking responsibility, not waiting for the RCMP necessarily to step in or something. We can, as a community, take responsibility. Government effectiveness. And again, this is based on the services that you provide for your people. Are you taking care of your elders? Are you taking care of your youth? Are you providing things for the youth to do? If there's nothing in the community, like how are you providing for your community? Regulatory quality, of course, sound policies and regulations, rule of law. We talked about that. And again, control of corruption. You probably have seen many, many situations where just the corruption itself it destroys everything. So let's get that under control. Applications. So how do those apply to us? Well, basically, our community members, they have to be able to participate in selecting chief and council democratically. They have to participate in the decision making. There has to be an absence of violence. There's no conflict of interest. Violence is not tolerated in the community. Chief and council effectiveness, the quality and capacity of community services and their independence from political pressure, and the quality of policy formation. Regulatory control, the ability of chief and council to provide sound policies and regulations that enable and promote individual community members' social and economic development. Rule of law, community members have confidence in and abide by the rules of the community. I know 3 communities right now that I personally know that have made a decision they're a dry community. That's it. End of it. There's no other option. They're a dry community. So each community can make their own rules for their community, including the quality of property rights. And that, of course, is I know that many communities are working towards that. I know here in BC it's different because we don't have treaties. You know, the certificate of possession is really, really important here, that our, you know, the community members can actually say they own this property. The police and the courts and the risk of crime, and again, zero tolerance for corruption in all forms, especially at the leadership level. What does success look like? This is what success looks like. Sound financial management when you're administering programs on behalf of other governments, while achieving your own objectives in interaction with those governments. So basically, you have to have your books in order. And they have to be transparent. If somebody wants to see the books, they should be able to see the books. If it is done properly, if it's done openly. Environmental and natural resource management, while fulfilling their unique responsibilities as stewards of ancestral lands and waters. So just a quick little story. There's a big debate right now going on between conservation areas and protected areas. And what I've been hearing is conservation areas are not necessarily good because you can't do anything with it. Like, they're good to a degree, but as First Nations, if we have conservation areas only, we can't do anything in those areas. But if we have pieces of land that we can be good stewards of and maximize the resources, and we learn how to work, which we know, we can talk to our elders, we know how to do this. But the outside world seems to think that conservation areas is the key. It's not. Good stewardship is the key. The land has the resources we need. We just need to lead to work with the land properly. Preservation of language and traditions while balancing change with cultural continuity. Again, we talked about that. Inventing programs, find out what the needs are of your community. Make sure that you have the programs in place that they need. Finding and training leaders. We talked about that. Number one, start that in your schools. Like, I remember when I grew up, I was in brownies. I mean, who was... that was the thing, right? I was in brownies, and it sounds funny, but you know what? I was really proud when I got my little badge. Like, and it just taught me leadership. I really hated the brown uniforms though. But it was a great little thing, you know, for kids. I always actually wanted to be in Scouts, but they wouldn't let me. But that's all right. They seem to have more fun. I didn't like sewing. I much rather would have built a fort or something. And then developing vigorous economies and raising living standards, not just of the leaders, of the entire community, while building successful societies and improving community life and preserving your distinctive nation and band. Wrapping it up. I love this. This is my favorite quote. Economic growth without investment in human development is not only unsustainable, it's unethical. Any comments, questions, or anything you'd like to discuss?
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Angela. Thank you. So round of applause for Angela. I particularly loved how you started off with talking about what does good leadership look like. And I found that just to be such a rich reminder of these are the qualities that we want to see in our leaders, but also in ourselves. So thank you for starting us off in a good way. So we're going to open the floor for anyone who may have any questions. Would love to hear from you, or any comments. Feel free to unmute yourself. Come join us in this conversation. The floor is open. And like Angela said, this PowerPoint will be sent to all of you. So you will have access, so you'll be able to cover or go reread, be re-inspired looking at the PowerPoints that we will send out your way.
I just had some clarifications. Thank you, Angela. It's Patricia. You had said, and I totally agree with you in terms of firm policies and enforcement of those policies. And so do you have any examples of business ethic policies? I know that we mostly talked about First Nations specific, but even from a nonprofit organization, do you have examples or some links to where we can find some good business ethics policies?
I'll write that down and I will send that.
Okay.
Business ethics policies. Yes, I will do that.
And then you also stated that you can provide some links for the community assets.
Okay. Yes. I think I just actually posted that on LinkedIn too. But
okay. I'll find you on LinkedIn.
I will send, I think I put it in, I'm involved in the economic one and the professional one, I think, but I will look for it again anyway, Patricia.
So do you find, Angela, like you said, that a lot of our nations out here in Saskatchewan are treaty-based, and a lot of them, of course, are moving to, we talk about governance, shared governance, we talk about sovereignty, we talk about, you know, how to move forward. And a lot of our nations have very long-term chiefs. And sometimes that's good, you know, when you're talking about one of our, you know, let's just say even White Cap Dakota Nation. You know, Chief Darcy Bear has been out there for a long time, and he's had lots of good influences in different areas. And but sometimes not all of our nations benefit from long-term leaders. And then one of the challenges that I saw in when you're talking about developing policy and developing accountability and using your voice, if we don't have leaders that have, you know, long-term leaders, I don't have a specific nation in mind when I'm having this discussion, but, you know, we've got some nations that have had, you know, 20, 30 years of the same chief, same leaders. And so it gets challenging, I think, in terms of developing those future leaders. And we only have so many positions on nations. So, you know, if we have a young Braden in our territory and we want to encourage that individual and we want to support them and mentor them, but there's no guarantee at the end of the day that that's the direction that the nation's going to go. So one of the things that we like to do is I liked your idea in terms of starting a leadership program, but as I said, how do you encourage individuals in terms of that sustainability when some nations are just stuck? And to get unstuck, all the things that you suggested, you know, it's up to that chief and council to implement them.
It is. But to be honest, most of the change that I have seen, not only in communities, but in organizations, and actually, even if you look at countries, are typically started grassroots. So I think that, you know, the leaders, yes, they have that role and responsibility, but so do we, just as community members. Like, there's nothing stopping the community itself to say, we're starting a leadership, you know, a bunch of moms or a bunch of youth get together even and say, we're going to start this. And, you know, we're going to help ourselves. And then all of a sudden you're developing this whole community of leaders. And, you know, maybe they go to chief and council and say, okay, you've been here for 20 years. Like, we're ready now. We're ready to take the reins. We have some really great ideas. You know, again, if chief and council are voted in, more and more people that become leaders themselves and start to understand what good governance looks like and see the opportunities are there, they're the ones that are voting too. What do you think? Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. You got to start where you are.
And
not to give up. I loved your one of your I can't remember where it was, but it was talking about the acronym in terms of leadership. You said that you have to be hopeful.
Yes.
And so yes.
And that is hard sometimes, I know, especially if you're right in it. And that's why that meta leveling ability is so important to develop, to be able to rise above and pretend you're looking down on the situation, the whole situation. And like, what would it look like if I wasn't in it?
Thanks so much for Patricia for your own knowledge that you just shared. Thank you. And the question, is really, really important. And I'm seeing more and more of our organizations, our First Nations, really pouring into the development of leadership, particularly our young people. And I love to see that. So your point was like really great. Your question was really, really important. In the chat box, there's just many, many comments of saying, thank you for bringing this knowledge to us today. Can you come back in 6 months and remind us? I feel like, we always need that refresher because, we're busy doing our things and just being with community. And I think it's really helpful when we have these reminders, of this is what leadership is. Because sometimes we get so focused over here that we forget about why we're here. What is our why? And our why is that 7th generation. Our why is I'm sitting beside this beautiful relative. The tree is preserving this land. Our why is building stronger and strengthening our communities. Bringing the entrepreneurs and those ideas, letting them be able to flourish. So remembering our why, I think, is always important. So you helped us today to remember our why. Why are we here? Why are we working where we are? So thank you. So we have but a few moments. Does anyone else have a last comment or question? Would love to hear from you. Just reminding you that this presentation is being recorded. So you can access this on our website, but also the PowerPoint will also be emailed to all of you and it will be shared. So you will have access to this good knowledge in many capacities. So it doesn't seem like there's any questions or comments. So Angela, thank you. Thank you for bringing your knowledge, stirring that fire again, reminding us why, and really wanting the best for our communities and being that voice. So thank you. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Go sit by a tree, go sit by a relative, spend time on the land, find that good connection. It's good for your soul. So I hope you're all are doing well and we'll see you again. So just reminding you, there's no webinars next week, but we'll see you in the first week of September. So take care, everyone. Peace.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. Enjoy.